Hi everyone, my name is Jack Lodmill, and today I'm going to be talking about biological altruism, which is one of the topics that we cover in chapter 4 of Sober's textbook. So without further ado, let's get into it. In a biological sense, altruism refers to behavior by organisms which is disadvantageous to the organism, but is advantageous to other organisms. Another way of saying that would be an altruistic trait is one that is deleterious to the individual possessing it, but advantageous for the group in which it occurs. Note that this is a different definition than how we would typically use altruism in everyday English. In a biological context such as this, there's no concern for the mindset, the selflessness of the organism involved. Two common examples of altruistic traits can be found in the lives of honeybees and crows. In the case of the honeybees, the mechanism by which the bee loses its stinger and subsequently dies when it chooses to sting a target is advantageous for other members of the group who have had a potential predator deterred, but is obviously disadvantageous to the individual bee. Similarly, with crows, crows will actually set a sentinel or send one of their own crows out to serve as a watchman. And if that crow sees a predator approaching, then they will call out. Again, this is advantageous for the group, but it draws attention from the predator towards the crow, thus making it an example of altruistic behavior in the natural world. So now that we know what altruistic behavior looks like, we can begin to discuss why it is controversial. On the one hand, it seems only natural that what is good for the goose is good for the gander. However, on the other hand, natural selection seems as though it would preclude the idea of altruism. If animals behave altruistically, they are inherently accepting a disadvantage, which makes them a less fit species in the eyes of Darwin. Because of this decrease in fitness, we should, in theory, see animals which possess altruistic traits die out over time due to the reduction in their survivability because of the negative effects of the altruistic trait. And yet, there are the honeybees and the crows waiting to prove us wrong. So what gives? In order to really dive into this topic, we'll have to introduce a subtopic, which is the levels of selection or units of selection. This is the primary topic in chapter 4 of the Sober textbook, but to introduce it here, there are several different levels at which natural selection could be presumed to act. If natural selection acts at the genetic level or the gene level, then that would imply that genes are competing against other genes in order to survive and continue in their hosts. The traditional view of natural selection is that it occurs at an organism level, with organisms competing against each other for survival in the natural world. And the group level postulates that natural selection can occur at the level of groups of organisms, with groups competing against each other. Now, this group level selection is really the crux of the argument about altruism. Group level selection would account for the rise of altruistic behaviors that has been observed in the natural world. Let's consider an example. Let's say that we have a group of monkeys, and some of the monkeys will share their bananas with other members of the group, while other monkeys will not share their bananas. we'll call these monkeys altruistic monkeys and selfish monkeys. We would expect that this group of monkeys would perform well and survive well relative to other groups. However, we would also expect that this group of monkeys would, over time, have fewer and fewer altruistic monkeys, because altruistic monkeys possess a disadvantage in the arena of natural competition that is this group. Group level selection explains this by postulating that the benefit afforded to a group with some altruistic members is enough to offset the disadvantage held by the altruistic monkeys. This theory was supported by not only Charles Darwin, but also R.A. Fisher, J.B.S. Haldane, S. Wright, and Konrad Lorenz. However, group-level selection still cannot explain the presence of altruistic tendencies in species in the natural world. Because altruism confers a distinct evolutionary disadvantage, we would expect that it would evolve out rapidly from any group that it is present in. In the 1960s, the work of G.C. Williams and J. Maynard Smith was extraordinarily influential in disproving in the popular mind the group selection theory. They used several mathematical models in order to prove this, and they specifically were able to prove that any population with altruistic members will eventually breed out those altruistic members. These models do not say that altruism cannot evolve in a natural system, only that it is relatively improbable that altruism will evolve in a natural system. This observation, however, contradicts the multitude of examples which we see in the natural world, so there must be something else at play here. The kin selection model adequately explains the variety of altruistic behaviors seen in the natural world. In this model, our altruistic traits are conditionally linked to related members of the population. What this means is that families of organisms behave altruistically towards each other, even if this results in a negative outcome for the altruistic member of the family. It results in an increase in survivability for the family as a whole. Because families are genetically related, the likelihood that an altruistic member is passing on a gene via another member of the family is high. Because of this link between altruistic effects and genetic populations as seen in families, we can explain the proliferation of altruistic behaviors in the natural world. For example, if we take our monkeys again, but apply the altruistic and selfish monkeys solely within a single family, then it makes sense that altruistic behaviors would develop. When one of the monkeys has several bananas and they share it with their other family members, this increases the likelihood of the family members surviving and continuing to carry that altruistic gene.
A mathematically equivalent, although more difficult to conceptualize idea, is the idea of inclusive fitness. Inclusive fitness is a metric which Williams developed in order to define kin selection as an organism level selective process. The term inclusive fitness as a metric refers to an individual's personal fitness as well as a weighted average of the fitness which he confers onto other members of a group. The weighting of that average is assigned based on the closeness of the relationship to the original member. By framing the evolution in this way, we can think not of genes specifically trying to increase their spread, but of organisms within a group trying to maximize their inclusive fitness. Because this conception of fitness is broader than the traditional fitness that we would think of in a natural evolutionary system, it results in a broader range of actions which will result in propagation of a species. Despite the fact that they are mathematically equivalent, it is typically easier for people to conceive of the selfish gene theory as popularized by Dawkins rather than the inclusive fitness theory. Which one makes more sense to you? Do you find it more compelling that a given gene is maximizing its spread within a population? Or do you find it more compelling that inclusive fitness is the measure by which we should consider the evolutionary advantage of a given trait? I may be in the minority, but I find the inclusive fitness metric more plausible than the gene level selection theory, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
One interesting side exploration in this chapter is a discussion of Weismannian genetics. Weismann argued that parental genotypes, that is, the genes of a parent in a group, influence directly parental phenotypes or physical expressions of those genes, and they influence directly offspring genotypes, which are the genes of the children. But parental phenotypes do not influence offspring genotypes or offspring phenotypes. The example used for this is of a mother giraffe who stretches her neck over time in order to lengthen it and be able to reach more leaves. This is an example of a phenotype or physical trait, but it is not something that can be passed on to the children of the mother. Instead, the children will have to stretch their own necks manually. G.C. Williams, who we met earlier in our discussion of mathematical models, observed that when threatened by predators, musk oxen, shown here, gather into a sort of wagon train with males on the outside of the circle and females and children in the center. One possible explanation for this phenomenon is group selection, that groups which observe this altruistic behavior from the males are more likely to survive in the wild. However, Williams posited a different theory. Rather than assume that this is the result of group selection, Williams proposes that males could simply be responding to environmental stimuli in this situation. Because male musk oxen are larger and females and adolescents are smaller, the males are more likely to engage with potential predators because they feel that they are more likely to win that altercation. This does not rely on a group level selection theory to explain altruistic behavior.
Instead, this could be considered an example of gene-level selection theory. When we compare our definitions of gene-level selection and kin selection, we can see that they're actually quite compatible. In a scenario where kin selection is the likely source of a particular trait, that it represents a genetic selection, a gene-level selection of that trait. Notice that this means that our unit of selection is a gene which can exist, and in fact does exist, across multiple organisms. It is not restricted purely to a singular organism or a singular organism's expression of a given gene. If we return to our previous slide breaking down the possible levels of selection in biology, we can see that the controversy here is a conflict between gene-level selection theory and group-level selection theory. As we've seen, gene-level selection theory is the more popular of the two in the present day. However, Sober encourages us not to throw out group-level theory entirely. Sober criticizes both Richard Dawkins and the points that he makes in The Selfish Gene, as well as G.C. Williams. Sober explains that the arguments made by Dawkins and Williams against group-level selection are fallacious. According to Sober, altruistic traits can be explained whether or not group selection is at play. I'd now like to ask you for your opinion. What do you think? Is altruistic behavior more easily explained by gene-level theory or by group-level theory? And where does this leave kin selection? Is kin selection an example of gene-level selection theory, or is it an example of group-level selection theory? I'm interested to hear your thoughts in the comments below. While group-level theory is substantially less popular than gene-level theory, the mathematical models published by Williams do not preclude group-level evolution as an explanation for altruistic traits. However, it does make those evolutions highly unlikely. Because of this uncertainty and ambiguity, there remains a controversy over whether group-level evolution is possible. By way of conclusion, I hope that this presentation has been interesting and insightful for you. I hope that we've shed a little bit of light on some of the competing theories of biological altruism, and I'm very much looking forward to reading all of your comments in the discussion post on Canvas. Thank you all for your attention, and I hope you have an excellent week.